Craig. How are you?
Hi, George. I'm great.
It's good to have you on the program. First of all, Craig, tell me a little bit, the Nye incident. What is this?
The Nye incident is inspired by true events. As I was brought into the story by Whitley, apparently some things very like this in real life are actually happening. And Whitley and I took it and created a story that is fiction, but hopefully sort of echoes some of the terror that the people involved in these experiences have actually lived through.
And Whitley, Nye, is this for Nye County where art is, or is that something else?
I don't know.
Because everybody's going to ask that.
No, I know they are, and it's just a name that came into my head, and this stuff didn't happen in Nye County as far as I know.
Okay, now...
It's awfully lonely out there where art is, though, I will say that.
It sure is. It's pretty desolate. Now, you don't get scared easily, Whitley.
No.
And this scares you. Why?
Well, I'll tell you the main reason it scares me. And I found out about it in 2001, 2002, back in there. And the thing that was so creepy about it is most of it has happened within 30 or 40 miles of the old cabin I had in upstate New York, where I was struggling to go out into the night alone to be with the visitors, where my children and my friends' children and my friends were having close encounter experiences. And this also somehow was part of it. Or it's not. I'm just not certain. I don't have absolute proof, George, but there's enough smoke to where you think there might be some fire. And frankly, it's obsessed me for so long. I had to do what I did with the other fear. Me. It's very personal, this story. Very personal.
Is this something that, of course, researcher David Jacobs has hinted about in his works, that visitations aren't as friendly as some people think?
That's right, he has. And David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins have both always been sure I was a sort of shill for evil aliens. They did not understand, and they've never understood what I was doing, which is that I want to see this clearly. I'm not an advocate for they're good guys or they're bad guys. What I think is they're probably real complicated guys just like us, and maybe more complicated than we are. And who knows, maybe crazier. I mean, we're pretty crazy. If you look at us from the outside looking in, what's going on in this world right now in Kenya and in Iran and Iraq, in China, in Zimbabwe, it's a crazy place.
All right, Craig, Whitley somehow contacts you, summons you into this project. Exactly how did this evolve?
Well, I knew Whitley and I have known each other professionally for a very long time, but we hadn't seen each other for years. And one day I get a call from Kevin Nicholas, who is the VP of Development over at Mark Wolper's company. And Mark had been talking with Whitley, and Whitley had told him this story. And I got the call one day, and Kevin's like, Whitley has a story. He says he's too scared to write. And so we want you to come in. And I started laughing. I'm like, oh, Whitley is too scared, so you call me. I'm a big fan of Whitley's work. I'm like, this must be really interesting. And they told me a little bit about it, very, very little, about the human mutilations, like the cattle mutilations and possible alien involvement. And I didn't know very much going in, but I got this instant impression of how I wanted to handle the story.
The Nye incidents, human mutilations, Whitley, that tells me that people are being hacked up. Now, are we tying this into cattle mutilations? Is this the same thing?
I think it is. Let's see why don't we find a writer? And they brought up Craig, and he's a very interesting guy. Craig's fairly unscarable, but he's also outside of this thing at the moment. I don't know if he will be after this novel through their eyes.
All right, Whitley, with an overview then of the Nye incidents, what are we talking about? Are we talking about abductions? Are we talking about mutilations of humans like cattle, as we were saying? What are we talking about here?
I think that we could be talking about abductions and mutilations, but in one case that Linda tried to study some years prior to that, a man was found on a lakeside, and in the very condition that you described, badly mutilated in a very odd way. So much so that I believe, and that if I'm not correct, she told me that the coroner was aware of the cattle mutilation phenomenon and got her involved because of the similarity. Whereupon she went to interview him a second time, and she was told, "I'm sorry, I can't talk about it anymore. I've been told that I can no longer talk about this case."
I've been told I can't talk about it.
End of story.
Did it appear, Whitley, that these bodies were dropped? I mean, how did they get there? Were there any footprints or anything like that around them?
That is another part of it, and that's the thing that is the center of the Nye incidents, because I heard from a lady who knew a coroner in northern New Jersey. And now this is getting real close to home because, this is like maybe 40 miles from my cabin.
Right.
And the coroner got in the number of cases in which the bodies had been mutilated in the cattle mutilation way and had then been dropped on the roofs of buildings, and they were all unconnected people and street people.
Dropped on the roofs of buildings?
That's what she said, and I immediately began attempting getting contact with friends in law enforcement and saying, let's look at the National Crime Reporting database and see if these crimes are present in the database. And they were not present in the database. And any murder is going to be there, and pretty quickly. Not always. I mean, because every jurisdiction has different rules, and
sure.
But they never showed up in the database, and this went on for a period of weeks. I was receiving reports of this, and then the lady says to me, she can't talk anymore."
Whitley, I guess we could say this is kind of the dark side of the UFO phenomenon, isn't it?
Well, it's the dark side of something, that's for certain. It really, really is. And if you want to get into the sort of deeper ruminations about this, if you're really curious, you can go on unknowncountry.com and click on Whitley's journal.
Okay.
And you have to wonder, you have to think to yourself, like I have spent hours with Linda, we've talking about what is it about the cattle mutilations, I mean. And they are entirely real. And what about the other thing, the strange half-cat mutilations where these poor little cats are bizarrely cut up, drained of blood, and then put back where they were first found? I mean, what is that about? I'll creep you out more if you want me to.
All right, go for it.
Okay. There's another form that we've heard a little bit about that I saw once briefly, and then I saw two of these creatures, and they looked sort of human. They had a sort of faintly oriental look to them. And some of the listeners are going to know about this because they've encountered them from time to time. I mean, you don't encounter them like in the context of an abduction at all. They're usually seen like on the street and stuff. Another person who had a number of encounters with them was being followed by them. They were in an old jalopy, an old car, an old 70s Buick or something. And he actually, at one point, went to the car when they were in, this is happening to him a lot in Manhattan, and they were stopped on a street corner, and he'd seen them 4 or 5 times. And he didn't realize they were not of this world. He thought they were, people from another country or something. So he went over and he said, why am I seeing you guys all around, behind me all the time? And one of them looked up at him, and he said, as soon as I saw its eyes, I realized this was not a human being, and said in this strange kind of gravelly voice, we're going to cut your head off.
Oh, God.
Well, okay. That happens. That happens back in
That's far from probing, Whitley.
Happens back in the early 90s.
Craig Spector, what do you think of this story and these type of stories?
Well, they fascinate me. I mean, stories of this nature have been going on for decades. It kind of flies under the radar of conventional mainstream media. Mm-hmm. But if you really want to get into this, you kind of have to go looking for it unless it's looking for you. And if you look for it, you'll find it. These things have been going on. They are unexplained. They are utterly mysterious and pretty terrifying.